and they were lit up like constellations by this bioluminescence. So it's movement in the water that triggers the bioluminescence. And where my peak was hitting the water was like sparks coming off an angle grinder. And the propellers of the skiffs are spinning in the water. You know, they're tied up next to the mothership, and they're spinning in the water, and there's spirals of bioluminescence coming off them. And I'm standing there just mesmerized, as you can imagine. And I look up, and there's 14 feet of bioluminescent crocodile closing in on me.
That was Peter Morse sharing a close encounter with a crocodile. You guessed it, we're going down under today on the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. Are you interested in heading out on a amazing Alaskan trip? You can find out how to join me on this hosted trip this summer to the final frontier. Go to wetflyswing.com/AK to get more details and find out if this trip is right for you. In today's episode, I talk with Peter Morse, a.k.a. the Lefty Kreh of Australia. Even though Peter will tell you he doesn't necessarily love that term. That's kind of what he is in Australia. Peter describes how to present a fly for Baramundy, one of his favorite species out there, why the hit is like a hammer blow, and the vast diversity of fishing in and around Australia. So, without further ado, here's Peter Morse. How's it going, Peter?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Dave. How are you, mate?
Good. Thanks for coming on. I think you're on the other side of the world. We're chatting here, which is the amazing thing about this online stuff. One of the good things we could have a conversation. Probably, I'm not sure if we'll meet down the line. Hopefully, we do. But yeah, I want to talk a little bit about your background. You're known out there as kind of the I've heard different names, but like the Lefty Kreh in Australia, you're one of the big names out there. I want to talk about all of that, how you got there. But first, can you tell us how you first got into fly fishing?
Yeah, the Lefty tag sort of was a little embarrassing for me. I mean, he was such a great man, and this is such a small pond down here, and he was such a huge man in the international scene. But I guess as far as beginnings, my grandfather and my father were both fly fishermen, and I inherited a fly rod, an old Hardy cane fly rod, and a Hardy Perfect reel, and a very, very coily silk fly line that was like one of those slinky things you walk down the stairs. When we moved to Australia, so I was born in Fiji and grew up there, and I didn't know Dad was a fly fisherman back then, but I certainly knew my grandfather was. Anyway, I inherited all this gear when Dad died, and it was. I still remember the day. It was like some switch had been thrown, some light came on. I do believe there's I like to call it a fly fishing gene, and it usually takes something for that to kick in, and that's what exactly what happened to me. And we were living in Sydney at the time, and I'd come from Fiji, and of course I'd never been to the mountains. I didn't even know what fly fishing was, but suddenly I found myself caught up in this world, and I've never looked back from there. At the time, I remember wanting, this is all I want to do. And of course, you couldn't make a living from it, particularly back then. That was 1974.
74?
74, yeah. It just sort of set me on a path, and I guess, I think it was Mark Twain who said the secret to a happy life is to make your vocation your vacation, or it may even have been the other way around, your vacation vocation. But that's sort of what I've done, and I like to boast to my friends that I haven't had a proper job since 1989.
Yeah. And what was that? So 74. And how old were you in 74 when you first got your dad's stuff?
I was 20.
You're 20. Okay, 20. So 20 years old, and then what did you do from there until 89? Did you have just different odd jobs, and what was that transition like?
I worked in the wine industry. I was very fortunate to get a job with one of the great men of wine in Australia, a fellow called Len Evans, who was a worldwide figure within the wine industry. And I worked for him for a number of years, and then I went off and I became a sommelier. I did wine lists for restaurants, and I mostly worked weekends, sort of Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I was a wine judge, and I fished the rest of the time. I moved out of Sydney to the mountains so I could go trout fishing. Mm-hmm. And in sort of the middle of all of that, I discovered saltwater fly fishing too. So that was in 76, 77. Yeah. So my background is basically the wine industry, and I realized, in the mid 80s that being drunk for a living didn't have a big future. Yeah. And I preferred going fishing anyway, and there wasn't a big future in that, but at least you stayed healthy.
Yeah, it is. I occasionally ask that question about, vices or things that we do to ourselves that aren't maybe the healthiest. Has alcohol, has that been something that you kind of went away from? I mean, obviously we've all had a lot of us have had a taste of it, but has that been something that's kind of been a crutch or something has impacted your life?
No, I hope not. I certainly do enjoy wine, fine wine still. My whole family have been in the food and wine industry. I have a stepson who's a winemaker. I have a son who's a chef. My other son's wife is a chef. My current partner, her ex-husband is a chef. Her sister's a chef. Wow. So we've had the real food and wine thing within our family, and or our families. Yeah. I still enjoy wine, but my capacity to drink it is very limited these days. I don't, and I'm certainly very cautious about wine or overconsumption in particular, getting in the way of being able to live a healthy life. Yep. If I got to keep doing what I'm doing and what I've been doing for the last many years, then I make a big effort to stay pretty healthy. I eat very well, and I drink very much in moderation these days. Yep. So I keep a really good lid on it. But there was some big years.
Yep, that's right.
back in the day when a younger body could deal with it.
Yeah, that's right. I think it seems like most of us have gone through that period where you kind of abuse your body and you make it through. And then you hit your whatever period that is, your 30s or 40s or 50s, and you realize, wow, I can't really. My body is what's the word for it? It doesn't recover as quick as it used to.
Yeah, exactly. And the moment it starts to interfere with my ability to fish and enjoy fishing, and in particular that word enjoy fishing, because the wine and booze really disrupts your sleep pattern, my sleep pattern anyway. And if I'm not getting a good night's sleep, I'm not fishing well, and I'm not enjoying it. Yep. So, and I really want to enjoy it. I still fish pretty hard when I'm out there, and I don't want a big night on the booze messing around with my enjoyment of fishing.
No, definitely not. No, it's interesting. We've talked about. In fact, I have a question. Sometimes I ask at the end of the episode in the kind of the rapid fire round. I kind of jokingly call it, but what is your favorite drink to have when you get off the water? In the evening, would yours be a nice glass of wine? Is that what you go for?
Yeah, absolutely. A good glass of red wine. Yeah. But I don't want to sound like I don't drink. I mean, I was in the US recently, and I caught up with a great old mate, and I went and bought a wonderful bottle of red wine, and we sat down and had dinner, and we consumed that thing. And I can tell you, if there'd been another one available, we would have drunk that as well. But that's a moment fired by great conversation, great food, great wine, and a great old friendship. So I'm certainly if the moment's right, I'll be there.
That's it.
I'll be there batting hard.
That's it. Nice. Well, I was going to check in too. You mentioned, your dad passing away and leaving your, some gear for. What did your folks do back then? When they were alive, or I'm not sure if what your mom did or if she's still alive.
Yeah, Mum's still alive. She's 93, still lives by herself. She's in great health. She still lives in her own home. So Dad was a Spitfire pilot in World War II. And after the war, he got a job in Fiji where he met Mum. So Mum came out to Fiji prior to World War II. Her parents migrated from Scotland to New Zealand. And then he was a Boilermaker and he got a job in Fiji. So Mum and Dad met in Fiji after the war. And, of course, I was born there and I had 3 sisters. So he worked for the sugar company over there and, his job was to coordinate the harvest, work with the farmers, do all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. It was an Australian company called CSR. And he worked for them, and he died over there, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. That was back in 1971.
Oh, wow. Yep. Right, 71. Okay. And I kind of was thinking too. I mean, this is kind of. I know you're probably not a historian, but just thinking back, when you think of Australia and New Zealand, I mean, we hear a lot about it. Obviously the fishing, New Zealand comes up a lot with all the great fishing there. When you look at Australia, what do people? What are people coming there from out of the country to fish for? Is there a species that people really target, or one that comes to mind?
One of the really big issues in Australia is that we have so many species. It's I've fished the Florida Keys, and you've got tarpon, you've got bonefish, you've got permit, maybe. One of the issues facing us here is what fly do I tie on at the start of the day? Which rod do I pick up? Because you encounter so many different species in the course of a day that, you've got to have 2 or 3 rods rigged, or you've got to be very focused to target one species. We do have, so just starting with trout, we do have some reasonable trout fisheries. I mean, Tasmania, the World Fly Fishing Championships are on there.
Oh, yeah.
This month.
Oh, right.
And Tasmania has some unbelievably fine trout fishing, mostly lakes, very often in shallow lakes, and it's very much like bone fishing. So it's almost all sight fishing, but for trout.
Wow.
There's also the more traditional boat fishing methods, lock style, practice down there. It's a truly world-class fishery, but it flies under the radar because most people coming from Europe or the US tend to just stop at New Zealand.
That's right.
So we've sort of got Tasmania to ourselves. On the mainland, so Tasmania is an island off to the south of the Australian continent. On the mainland down in the southeast corner, we have the Snowy Mountains, and throughout that area there's a lot of fine, small trout streams. No big rivers, though. You've got to understand that geologically, Australia is roughly the same size as continental US without Alaska.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a big continent, but it is extremely flat. So the highest mountain is 6,000 feet. And so it's very dry. As a consequence of having no mountains, it's very dry. But we do have small alpine areas that do have some pretty good trout fishing. The rest of the continent is desert or semi-desert or arid, and so we have this very, very large coastline. So we have some fantastic saltwater fly fishing around that coastline. And then there are regions that have wet seasons and dry seasons, and the wet season being monsoonal. Mm-hmm. And often we call them cyclones, you call them hurricanes. A lot of the rainfall is cyclonically driven, and they have big rivers, seasonally big rivers, but also with large freshwater lagoons and river systems. And the main fish of those systems is barramundi. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people know barramundi. These are but a lot of people don't know about their life cycle. They're actually catadromous. So the reverse if you're an anadromous fish, they do they spawn in saltwater, and they do most of their growing in freshwater in those large lagoons, which we call billabongs. But those areas are across the north of Australia and also down the tropical east coast. But the west coast is where the desert, sort of the great deserts of Western Australia meet the Indian Ocean, has some fantastic saltwater fly fishing, some patches of good barramundi fishing, but a lot of great blue water and flats fishing. Around the southern half of the continent, there are quite a few different species. There's some pretty good saltwater fly fishing. New stuff's still being discovered every year. So our fly fishing scene is evolving fairly rapidly. There's we're in the middle of a big drought at the moment, so a lot of people are looking for other outlets for their fly fishing, and that really pushes development. You know, that's our current climatic situation, is pushing people to go and look in other places, and that's all very exciting. There's exciting stuff happening all the time. You know, I stay pretty much on top of what's happening on social media, and some of the stuff I'm seeing is just fantastic. Mm-hmm. And of course, the other side of it, we have the Pacific Ocean, we have New Zealand not far away,
right.
We have some fishing in the Indian Ocean, north of Australia into New Guinea. So we're pretty well served with a lot of extraordinary fisheries.
That's amazing. Yeah, you guys have. Yeah. It sounds like there's not really too much reason to leave. You've got it. It sounds like you got it all there.
The one thing we don't have is anadromous fish.
Oh, right.
They tried to introduce salmon to Tasmania, but they swim out to sea and we just never see them again.
No kidding.
Yeah, no, they're just gone. They're gone. They never come back.
Yeah.
So God knows, I don't know what happens to them, whether the ocean currents are probably just completely wrong.
Huh.
And we do have a lot of great fishing, but we do lack those big freshwater rivers. We do have them. I mean, we do have them, don't get me wrong, but they don't have anadromous fish. And I quite enjoy fishing for those creatures.
No, it's a little different. No, I want to dig into a little bit maybe on the Baramundy, because that's definitely, like you said, a lot of people know of that species and they've heard about it. But before we get there, I want to dig a little bit more into, the story of how you got there. I know I was talking to a friend of mine, Paul, recently, and he was mentioning that he listens to this podcast and he loves it. And he loves it for the stories, hearing about how these people like yourself got to this place of, I think fly fishing has been, you've managed to make it a way of, your income for quite a while here. And can you tell me how that happened? Like in '89, you mentioned you started, I guess that's when it was a full-time thing. How did that all happen, and how do you do it today?
Sure. The one thing I was good at school was writing, and I read a great deal. I mean, growing up in Fiji, of course, there was no television, and the radio was on between 6 o'clock and 8 o'clock in the evening. So I read books. I consumed a vast number of books when I was young, and consequently, I really enjoyed writing. I love the English language and what it can bring to life. And pretty soon after I started fly fishing, I decided I wanted to write about it. So I started working on my writing ability. I did a couple of courses, and I think it would have been about 75. I produced so I hadn't been at it for very long. I produced my first article, which wasn't published. I bought a reasonable camera, a Nikon. I can't even remember. I think it was an F4, it may have been. I learned to take photographs. I did a photography course, and I decided there and then that that's what I wanted to do, and I sort of set my sails in that direction. I started writing. That was a long process, learning how to produce articles, but I'd remembered from school that a good story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Mm-hmm. and the beginning and the end need to relate to each other. And I worked on those principles. And I guess I've always been a bit of a natural storyteller. So putting a readable story, an interesting readable story, onto paper was not too difficult for me. And taking photos back then, man, the cost of film was horrendous.
Yep.
You know, you're trying to get action shots of jumping fish.
All right.
Man, I think slide film back then was costing me $50 per roll, with including the dripping. So it was an expensive and long process. But I wrote for a number of years, and sent material to magazines and had stuff published. Mm-hmm. Then my big breakthrough came. I'd done a lot of saltwater fishing, and my big breakthrough came when I was offered a job to captain a marlin fishing boat, or a sport fishing boat, back in Fiji. And I went back to Fiji in 1989, and that was my big break. And I spent a couple of years over there driving boats around the islands. Then I came back to Australia in late 1991, and penniless, absolutely. I had, I think, 13 cents to my name.
Wow.
Yeah, and fortunately, I have a wonderful woman in my life who helped me through a lot of that very difficult period. Then I got a job in New Guinea working for a guy called Dean Butler. Dean is a legend in this part of the world. He explored New Guinea for the famous New Guinea bass, and spent a lot of time up there. He since went on to become Tom Evans' right-hand man, was involved in all of Tom Evans' world record marlin captures, and fishes Florida a lot for tarpon up in Homosassa. But anyway, Dean and I go back a long way, and he gave me a job as a guide in New Guinea, and I spent a couple of seasons up there. I got malaria and pneumonia and got pretty sick, and came back to Australia. And I'd done some film work back in the 80s with a guy called John Hankey. John made a couple of videos when Lefty came down to Australia in the late 80s, 87, 88, and I actually got to meet Lefty in Sydney and had some wonderful casting time with him. But anyway, John asked me to present a small documentary he was filming. He had a background in television, for a local council, and it was a tourism promotional documentary. And while we were on the road, we got chatting about making. John had always wanted to make a TV series, and I said, "Well, hang on, I know a bloke who works for a TV station," and we sent him through. We sent this fellow through a proposal. He was number 2 at this TV station. I happened to know him again through my wonderful partner, and Monique, and we got the thumbs up to produce a television series on fishing.
Wow, and that's wild. Is that wild? The Wild Fish?
That's the Wild Fish series.
Yeah.
It was on primetime television, 8:00 on a Tuesday night. It ended up being sold to 32 countries around the world.
Wow.
Sage put in rods and reels and what have you. So I formed this association with Sage, which actually goes back to when Lefty came down to Australia. He, at that stage, put me forward as being one of their, potentially one of their young guns down here in Australia. Yeah. And so I have an association with Sage going back a long way, and they put a lot of gear into the TV series, and I guess from there we shot a second series, another 13 episodes, so 26 episodes altogether. And I guess, geez, once you've been on television, all sorts of doors open, all sorts of things happen.
Right.
I've never allowed that to mess too much with who I am, though. I think there can be you can go pretty wrong in believing that because you're on television you have something pretty special, and so I've always tried to stay away from going down that path.
Yeah.
To remain relatively humble. I mean, this is not curing cancer or what have you. It's just bloody fishing in the end.
Right.
But the fact that standing in front of a camera never intimidated me, and I could string the words together, I guess I found something that I could actually do pretty well there.
That's pretty cool.
And write the script and tell the story. So I guess that was the big moment that changed my life.
Yeah. What do you think, as far as being behind the camera and that whole thing, what prepared you? Do you think you're just naturally, that was one of your talents?
No, it was just naturally one of my talents. Look, I did a lot of theatre at school. I really enjoyed the world of acting and theatre, and it was something I did pursue briefly after school in live theatre, but they had me, they just sort of had me being an usher for 6 months before I could actually get a part on stage, and I got pretty jack of that and went fishing.
No kidding. So that was if you wouldn't have been a fly fishing, the guru or, what you are today, your other job might have been as an actor? Yeah,
perhaps so. Yeah. I really enjoy that side of it, of getting in front of a camera. I should just say it just doesn't intimidate me. Some people can have a good relationship with the camera, and I think that I've always been reasonably good there. It's not I'm not lost for words. Huh. You can operate. My thought is ahead of what I'm going to say. So, I'm not repeating myself, not stumbling over words, and so that makes for a good relationship with the camera and the person behind it.
Yeah,
and that's just a natural ability.
Mm-hmm. What do you think from the whole movie? I'm not sure how many seasons you did there, but what did you learn, or what was your takeaway from being behind, doing that work with the TV series?
Oh, I don't like television at all.
Oh, really?
No, I can't stand it.
Did you have to? Well, you probably had a lot of the commercials and stuff like that. You had to find sponsors and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's just the idea that being recognised in public I didn't like. On catch a train down to Sydney. I live about 2 hours west of Sydney, catching a train down to Sydney and people coming up to you and wanting your order. I'm a very private person.
Oh yeah.
I just don't like that, and I don't like being recognised in public.
There you go.
And I don't like the fact that people have huge expectations of you because you're on television. Therefore, you're going to be full of stories and jokes the whole time, that you're automatically the life of the party because you're on television. Well, I'm not. I'm a pretty quiet sort of guy, really.
Yeah. So
I have no problem handling public appearances and doing all that, but
mm-hmm.
And my private life is very private. And I think being on television, unless you're prepared to handle that kind of for want of a better word, let's call it public adulation.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're prepared to handle that, just stay away from it.
Right? Yeah, unless you love it.
In trying to protect your own privacy, you can also it can very quickly be misconstrued as being unfriendly or a snob.
Can you give me like an example of a situation where it kind of turned into something where it wasn't that enjoyable? After and how many years did you do the TV series?
I think we did it over 5 years, 4 or 5 years.
Okay, 5 years.
mid-90s through to the late 2000s.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, from then on, after the TV series, I started a guiding business with a mate up on Cape York, saltwater fly fishing guiding business, a fella called Alan Philliskirk. And we had a mothership up there that we leased. And look, a lot of people probably came on that mothership because I was on board.
Mm-hmm.
But the expectations put on me to perform like a bloody monkey.
Oh, right.
Performing monkey. I just wanted to go fishing. I just wanted to take people fishing. And to put that in the background, in the past, it's in the bloody past. That is not me. That is not who I am. This is who I am now. So
yeah.
I guided up there for a couple of years, and I actually got very frustrated with the lack of skill in a lot of people when I was guiding. And anyone who's guided will know exactly what I'm talking about. That the expectation put on a guide to put people onto fish, and your stalk and permit or whatever on the flats, and they just can't handle the conditions and make the casts, and it's the bloody guide's fault.
Yep.
I gave up on that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I went back to photography and so on.
Yeah.
But that was a real lesson for me. And at that time, although I'd had a pretty solid grounding in fly casting, thanks to a couple of good mates, it was that point that I realised that it really is at the heart of this sport. And if you want to become a better fly fisherman, just go and learn how to cast better. Yep. For me, it defines the sport. There are often conversations about, this fly or that fly, that's not a fly, or you can't do that. But for me, the sport is very clearly defined by fly casting. That is at the heart of the whole game. We don't put bait on the hook, and we don't troll the flies behind a boat. We cast them. And to become a better fly fisherman, you must become a better fly caster. And it's just that fundamental. So I really started focusing on my casting and sort of post guiding days, and started to really try and make something of that.
Yeah. And you are, I thought I saw something out there are you working currently on your certification or some part of that, or is that already done?
I'm an MCI with the Federation with Fly Fishers International, as they're known these days. I got my MCI level of casting instructor certification in 2009. I'm working towards my spay casting instructor.
Oh, that's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. I recently failed my test in Tacoma in Washington. I was in the US and sat my test. I had the nerves can just kill you in that game.
Oh, really? Yeah. We've talked a little bit about it on here. I've had some pretty decent spay casters that have told the story way back at episode 7, I think it was. We talked about how, you could be you can think you're you can be a really good caster, but when you get in that situation, there's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure. And my issue in Tacoma, I'll run through my excuses. I've had them in my head ever since. I just had a bad night's sleep. I couldn't get to sleep. And, at 1:30, I was still wide awake, 1:30 in the morning. I'd had a brilliant day at the lake where I was testing the day before, and I was ready. It was just, I'm going to smash this.
No kidding.
And 2:30, I was still awake, and I took an antihistamine pill at that stage just to try and knock the edge off. And I woke up a bit late and was a bit fuzzy in the head, and that's enough.
Yep.
Enough. There's they set the FFI set the bar at a very high level. I like to think it's the peak body for fly casting instruction worldwide, and I choked.
Yep.
As they say, and I threw a couple of tailing loops, I think, in the overhead task pretty early on, and sort of that was that. It was downhill from there. But anyway, I'll front up again.
Yep.
I'm back in the saddle after all that disappointment, and but I went on from there. I went on up to BC and spent 10 days fishing up there with Simon Gorsworth.
Oh, cool.
And a mate of his, and we flogged the Skeena and the Bulkley to froth. And, Simon got one steelhead. Gee, they're having a poor season there.
Yeah, I heard that.
I got a bump.
Oh, cool.
I did get a bump.
Yep, that's something. At least there's telling you there's a player out there. I haven't been up there in quite a while, but that is pretty amazing. Well, it's steelhead fishing. That's it. I've talked to the first 30 episodes of this podcast were mostly focused on steelhead and yeah. And that's the steelhead thing. Whatever you want to say, it's you could be the greatest fisherman in the world, and you could get skunked. Tomorrow, no problem.
That's a hard game, that one, but I actually really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the that whole world, that whole scene, and I'm really enjoying the space stuff. But off to New Zealand soon. New Zealand's got some wonderful big rivers. Huge rivers that are very, very lightly fished because everyone goes there and fishes the small to medium-sized rivers. I go there and focus on the big rivers that have big populations of fish and take the trout spay gear and swing away. I absolutely love it.
There you go. That's perfect. Yep. Well, maybe we can just turn this a little bit and talk a little bit. I mentioned Baramundy at the start, and maybe we can just dig into that a little bit. I'm not sure. We haven't talked about that on this show yet. Maybe you can just take us to your home water, wherever you fish for them there, and take us through how you get into those fish and maybe a little bit about what it's all about.
Okay, sure. So the Baramundy are a long way from where I live. So they're a tropical fish. Let's get that clear first. All along the eastern Australian coast in Queensland. They come as far south as the Tropic of Capricorn. Right across the north into Western Australia. That's their distribution. They are, I will say, my favourite fish. I do a talk for clubs, and I do a talk on my top 10 or my 10 most favourite fish. And Baramundy are number one. I put a lot of time into thinking about the order of these fish, and it has changed over the years, but Baramundy are definitely number one. I absolutely love fishing for them. They live in a wide variety of habitats. One thing I will say about them is 95% of the places you catch them, you also find crocodiles, saltwater crocodiles. So they're not generally a wading fish. Yeah. I've had some close encounters with crocodiles over the years in the north of Australia, but there are some places where you do find them along the beaches and around the rocky headlands of the coast. They are an euryhaline fish, so they can live in fresh or salt water. They are, as I mentioned earlier, catadromous. They spawn at the mouth of these the large estuary or tidal estuarine rivers in the wet season, and the best barramundi fishing systems have large lagoon or swamp systems at the back of them that flood during the wet season, during the monsoon season, and the fry will move back up into those lagoons and swamps to do their growing. They're very fertile, full of weed beds and frogs and all sorts of small fish and shrimp, and so they do their growing in those systems. Now, all barramundi are male at birth. At a certain size, and this is different in different waters. I think there's about 13 different subspecies or regional subspecies of barramundi. And at a certain size, some of them become females. But all the big ones are females. And the size that they switch to females, so they're a bit of a modern thing. They're transgender. So the big girls are all breeders, and they are followed around on the mud flats by a cluster of young males, randy young males, and they do their spawning, and the fry go up. And a lot of the areas with large swamp systems, a lot of them are sort of up around that 80 center mark where they switch to females by the time they get flushed out of those swamps. So they might be isolated in swamp systems for a couple of years, and in that time they grow, and then they return to the salt and do their breeding again. So the cycle starts again. So you can catch them up in the swamps. You can catch them in the rivers between the swamps and the ocean, which is where most people fish for them, but that's also the area. That swamp area and that river system is where the crocs live. Yeah.
What's your close? You mentioned a close encounter. Has that been just while fishing out there? Run into a few?
Run into a few then. Run into when we were on the mothership. I had one very close encounter at 3 a.m. When I'd got up. So the mothership was a catamaran, and I'd got up for a pee at 3 a.m. and went down off the back sponson of the cat, and it was one of those dark, starry nights, moonless night with no wind, and the water was full of bioluminescence.
Oh wow!
It was extraordinary, and we had 6 big groper that lived under the boat when we anchored in that system, in that river system, and they were lit up like constellations by this bioluminescence. So it's movement in the water that triggers the bioluminescence.
Yep.
And where my peak was hitting the water was like sparks coming off an angle grinder. And the propellers of the skiffs are spinning in the water. You know, they're tied up next to the mothership, and they're spinning in the water, and there's spirals of bioluminescence coming off them. And I'm standing there just mesmerized, as you can imagine. And I look up, and there's 14 feet of bioluminescent crocodile closing in on me.
Jeez.
It was only 20 feet out and coming fast.
Oh. And
if it hadn't been for the bioluminescence, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you.
No kidding.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I was only a foot off the water, and, it was coming in fast. Needless to say, I peed all down my leg.
Damn.
But anyway, there's been another couple of close encounters, but I won't. One I actually had a barramundi on. I'd waded up. This is a very small tidal creek on an island, in an island system up in northeast Northern Territory, and it was a year I tried to catch 100 species in a year on one rod.
Oh, cool.
7, yeah. And that's another story in itself.
Yeah.
And I'd wandered, I didn't have a barramundi on my list, and I wandered up the back of this bay following this, so big tides in that part of the world, following this creek along the mangrove line, knowing that so I'm on firm sand, and knowing that the first decent pool I came to would have barramundi in it. And there it was, right at the back of the bay. So this is dry sand, so the tide's out. Creek is still flowing out of the mangrove swamp. And there on the edge of the mangroves at the back is a pool. And I could see the barramundi, when they're resting, their head down and their tails are in the air, like a tailing fish, but they're not actually feeding. And I could see this bunch of barramundi tails, and they'll still feed. I threw a fly in there, bang, instant hook up. Baramundy starts jumping up. The pool's about the size of a suburban swimming pool. Baramundy starts jumping, and this 10-foot crocodile comes tail walking out of the mangroves at the back of the pool.
Wow.
I squealed and ran, still hooked up to the Baramundy, and I'm running across the sand flat, dragging this Baramundy, and then running. You know, it wasn't a big fish, about 4 or 5 pounds, and I was using a 9-weight rod. No, sorry, that's 7-weight rod, and I'm running, dragging this fish, and this bloody crocodile is chasing the Baramundy, and I realised it wasn't me. It was after the Baramundy, so I'm teasing. It's like I got a sailfish on a teaser.
So did you let go of the rod?
No, I didn't.
Yeah,
I didn't.
There you go. It was probably a sage, right? You couldn't let it go.
Yeah, and the fish, the barra chased me for about the crocodile chased us for about 30 or 40 meters, and then realised, you know, it wasn't going to get the fish. I kept pulling it away from it, and it turned around and went back into the pool. But
wow.
Oh, that was an extraordinary.
What's tailing? You said the alligator came out. Did you say tailing or out of the?
Oh, just tail walking.
Just tail walking. Like what is that? So they actually are standing kind of upright.
Exactly, just almost running across the surface of the water.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Scared the life out of me. Of course, I'm shouting. My mates are hundreds of meters away, and all that was left was the prints of the crocodile on the sand. That was all I could show them.
Wow.
And they came. Yeah. that was. I was laughing at the end because I realised this croc was totally
doing it
on the fish. I'm teasing him. I just kept pulling it away. Anyway,
what's the for a Baramundy? What's a big fish and what's a trophy size fish when you talk about those females?
Okay, so a wild fish. So the magic mark is a metre.
Okay.
So a metre, 37 inches.
Yep.
So we'll call it a 36-inch fish. A 36-inch fish, depending on the water it comes from, is going to be between 25 and 35 pounds.
Okay.
So a wild saltwater fish is probably going to be leaner than a freshwater fish. Now, Baramundy, we can also breed Baramundy, and a lot of the freshwater dams, or impoundments as we call them, along the Queensland coast have been stocked with Baramundy. And these are fantastic fisheries, like man-made fisheries. The fish go in as fingerlings, the size of your little finger, and they grow, 80, 90 pounds. So these impoundments are stocked annually with Baramundy, and in these man-made dams, they grow rapidly and they grow very, very large. Unless there's a flood event, they can't get over the dam wall to spawn, to get down to the fresh.
Right.
So they're trapped in there and they just keep growing. And big ones have been caught up 80, 90 pounds. My bet
90 pounds?
Yep.
Well, and are these still then, if they're not spawning, they're still males?
No, they're all females.
Oh, they still have that size change.
Yep. It's possible the size change or the transition from male to female happens at a fairly large size in those impoundments. So I don't have that figure. But the fishing can be extraordinary. So it's mostly sunken line fishing. It's sometimes sight fishing in winter when they get up into the warmer, shallow bays and backwaters. So in the estuaries and the tidal rivers, we like to fish on the neap tides. These rivers have a very big tidal variance between high and low tide, and on the neap tides you get cleaner water. Now you really have to fish from a boat, and you're fishing back to the bank in most situations, and these fish live in amongst the snags and rock bars and oyster rocks and what have you, and they're an ambush feeder, and they'll take up an ambush position in a place where the mullet are going to be sort of caught in an eddy or a swirl, and they'll sit under that, and they'll just smack them from underneath. They're not a great surface feeding fish. There are times when they will feed off the top, so generally you need to go down to them. I fish an intermediate line, and usually reasonably well-weighted flies. There's a wonderful fly called a pink thing, which is an iconic Australian Baramundy fly, sort of similar to one of Dan Blanton's Whistler patterns, but it started out as a Lefty's deceiver, and they put a pink collar on it. And it's a deadly fly tied with bead chain eyes or heavier eyes for deeper water and fast flow. And you're casting from the boat back to the bank, letting the fly sink into the cover, strip with a pause, and they usually hit on the pause. Now, a lot of people have tried to describe what's so special about Baramundy, and from everything I've read, no one has come close to quite capturing exactly what makes them so special. But I tell you that the hit is like a hammer blow. They hit the fly so hard, and then they head straight back into the cover that they've come out of, and you've got to stop them. And then they jump, and they're a wonderful jumping fish. They're very hard to get a hook into. They've got a mouth a bit like a tarpon. If you lift the rod to set the hook, you'll drop them every time. You must strip strike, and then it's all hand-to-hand stuff. There's no fighting these things on the reel. You know, you've got a strip line, and you've got to haul them out of the cover. It's real brutal hand-to-hand stuff.
So you don't have enough time to even get them on the reel.
Nope. Huh. If you stop to clear the line, like you might be throwing 50-foot casts, and you've stripped 20. They've hit the line of the fly. 30 feet out. You've got 20 feet of line. If you try and clear that line without getting the fish, without beating the fish first, and it's probably going to get you back into that cover. And if it's in among logs or rocks, they're going to be covered in barnacles and oysters and stuff, and that's the end of that. You're probably going to lose a fly line.
Oh, wow. Yep.
It's we call it give no line techniques. Give them no line. You're using the spring in that 9-foot rod, and I like to fish a 9 weight most of the time. Yeah. Sometimes 8, sometimes a 10, but a 9 is a really good compromise with an intermediate line or an intermediate tip line and a heavy fly that's going to hang in the snag. And it's it's take a wrap and haul them out of there.
Yeah. So these fish don't really take off and run for 100 meters downstream or anything like that?
Nope. It's a wrestle.
Yeah. Gotcha. Wow. But they'll jump, but they'll wrestle, but then they'll jump right in there, right in close. Or how far are you casting typically?
So typically, because you've got to be accurate, I mean, you really got to get your fly right into the cover. You want, 40 to 50 feet is about all you need to cast, but it's got to be accurate, and you've got to know the sink rate of your fly and your line. It's a bit like shooting birds on the wing. You've got to be able to put the fly on the upstream side of the current and then calculate its sink to the point where it's, at its prime depth in the snag. We fish flies with weed guards on them, snag guards on them, so you can walk them through the timber. And, of course, the fish don't have far to go once you hook them. At periods of a good bite period, they'll be out from the snag a bit, but a lot of the time they're just right back in that cover. And, the other side of barramundi is that they're such a beautiful looking fish. A saltwater barramundi is like polished silver, so beautiful. The freshwater swamp fish become quite dark. Their tails are black, but saltwater fish has bright yellow tail. And just beautiful looking fish. Nice. They got so many wonderful qualities about them. Why I love fishing for them.
Yeah. I'll put a couple of links in the show notes to some photos, and maybe I can find one of you with a Baramundy out there and toss that in for people to take a look at. You mentioned writing earlier on. I know you've got some books and some stuff out there. Is there a piece of work you're maybe most proud of or something you wanted to talk about here?
Yeah. As a book I self-published called A Few Great Flies and How to Fish Them, specifically how to fish them. It sort of started out as a fly pattern book for Australian saltwater fly fishing. But I realised that all of that stuff's online these days, Mm-hmm. And so I realised that the shortfall is how to actually fish flies. And this book focuses on what I consider the three fundamentals of good technique. One is your fly selection. Two is the depth you fish it at. And three is the retrieve that you use. So I call this the FDR principles. And I self-published that book. It's available. I'm very, very proud of it, mm-hmm. I must say. It's become a bit of a classic in this part of the world. Okay. And it's still available. It's available through my website.
Yep. Awesome.
Yeah.
I'll put a link out to your site and that book as well, so people can take a look at that. Well, I think we're going to try to wrap this up real quick. I got a quick little rapid fire round. I actually had a listener joke with me recently. He sent an email and said that he's never heard the rapid fire. It's never really that rapid, I think, is what he said, or something like that. But I'll try to make this one go a little bit faster. And I've got a few questions for you here. One of them, and actually this question came from another listener of the show, and he came up with his own question. This is, I thought, a really good question, and I didn't know who I was going to ask, but he said, what in fly fishing is ripe for disruption? When you hear somebody say that, if somebody asks you that question, what would be your response?
Is ripe or right?
Like ripe as in a fruit being ripe, so basically, what needs to be disrupted in fly fishing? Is there anything that needs to be shaken up a little bit, or, you know what I mean? Like, is there anything that's stagnant about fly fishing? I guess there's a few ways to look at that. Or do you feel that things are going pretty smoothly in the fly fishing world?
Things are going pretty smoothly, and I can only talk about this part of the world. Things are going pretty smoothly here. I think the use of really excessive leaders, like guys fishing 200 crap like that is just rubbish.
You mean like fishing the metal tippets and stuff like that, or?
Look, there are some species that require metal bite tippets. I mean, wahoo, barracuda, you just can't get away without wire bite tippets. So I'm talking about fishing straight through 100 and 200 pound leaders.
Oh,
wow. Not acknowledging anything to do with the IGFA system, or it's almost like a neglect of knot tying skills. Look, I could go down quite a long path there on what I think the fundamental skills are, but I also think that being able to tie good knots is an absolute fly fishing core skill.
Yep.
Because we need to manufacture leaders, often tapered leaders. We need to often fish quite fine tippets. This crap of fishing 100, 200 pound leaders.
Yeah.
You can't pull that much through a fly rod.
Why are people doing? I haven't heard much about this. Why would somebody want to use? And what species are they going for when they're needing to use 100 pound?
Often billfish.
Yeah.
And GTs, big trevally on the flats.
And what's a typical normal size you might use for GTs or billfish?
Heaviest I'll use for billfish is 30 pounds, which is not IGFA.
Yep.
IGFA, the maximum you can use is 10 kilos or 22 pounds. I'll fish 30 pounds. Billfish GTs 40 pounds, maybe 50. I just stop doing it, guys. It's crap. And we did a lot of pulling tests with heavy-duty fly rods, like 16, 17 weights, and the most we could pull was 22 pounds,
Yeah. Dang, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. All right. Well, that is that's a good answer to that question. Let's jump into, you mentioned one fly as far the pink thing. Is there another top fly you had mentioned for Baramundy that you would use other than that one?
Yeah, it's a fly I came up with myself. I call it a gusto because that's how they eat it, with gusto.
Uh-huh.
It's a very, very simple pattern with a marabou tail, a heavy chenille collar followed by a wound schlappen collar in front of it. So there's a lot of movement in it.
Yep.
Yeah, pretty simple fly. That's in my book.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, we got your books. We can check these out.
And so is the pink thing.
And the pink thing. Okay. And I'll just keep this as on our kind of the typical the 222 questions I ask. And, the other two questions are, if you had a couple of tips for Baramundy, has anything come to mind if somebody's out there, say they find themselves down in your neck of the woods and they're trying to get their first fish? Any tips you'd give them to help them find a fish or hook up with one?
Yep. Low tide period.
Okay.
You will, in most situations, you will need a boat. So get a guide. There are some good guides.
Yep.
Most situations. Cast accurately, know your sink rate of your fly, be persistent. They do have bite periods. They do move up and down the river constantly during the tide. You just need a good bag of skills to get Baramundy.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, you can get lucky. You can get lucky.
Yeah. What about,
a bit like steel,
What's that?
A bit like steelhead fishing.
Exactly. Yeah, you could definitely get lucky on that for sure. Yeah. Do you get any with the Baramundy? It sounds like they either hammer or they don't hammer, or they're not really playing with the fly too much.
They will play with the fly. Yeah, that can be terribly frustrating. They'll suck that fly in and blow it out quicker than you can ever react.
Oh, right.
And when the water's clean, you can see it happen.
Oh, man.
Oh, it's so frustrating.
Yeah. What about a couple of resources? Is there anything, if somebody, again, was going for Baramundy for the first time, is there any, books, magazines, videos, anything you would recommend? It could be maybe somebody else's stuff or anything that could help them.
Yep. Sure. There's a really good book about Baramundy written by one of Australia's real pioneer saltwater fly fishermen, Rod Harrison. He has a good book out on Baramundy. There's a lot of lure fishing in there, not just fly fishing.
Sure.
There's probably a lot of good sources of Baramundy instruction and fishing on YouTube. You just need to put your Googles on and have a look. There's so much stuff out there. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, there are magazines and magazine stories. Yeah, the info's all out there, Dave.
Yeah, no problem.
These days. Yeah.
I know, that's good. Well, I'm going to skip. I'm not going to be able to get to all of our, the little random questions, but I'll pick out a couple here. One of them, you mentioned the 100 species in a year. That's pretty. We've talked a little bit about, there's some people out there doing the species game thing. Jeff Currier, I think, has like 400 species and things like that. But
wow.
Like for you, do you have a bucket? Do you have a species or a list that you want to target before it's all over, or are you just kind of, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I'm on 311 species.
Are you really?
Yep.
Oh,
yep.
Wow. So so again, this keeps coming up. I asked Jeff, who was number 2. Well, we didn't know if Jeff's, I'm assuming he's number 1, but so you're right there. You're kind of in that game.
Yeah, I could talk about this for a while, but I think it's really important. I'm asked, I'm practicing casting where I live, and people say, what do you catch? What do you catch fly fishing around here? Where are the trout around here? And I thought, well, it's just, I do most of my local fishing here in summer is for carp. I go sight fishing for carp. I love it.
Yeah, for sure.
So for me, recognizing, all fish, all waters, we can fly fish for all of them, and just recognizing that and accepting that is a big part of this. And that's why I started this species thing. I'm patron of a group called Boneheads, and we get together every year, and we just racked up our 200th species for the group this year.
Oh, wow.
And I sort of encourage the guys to keep their species list just for the sheer hell of it, so that when someone says, oh, what do you catch on fly, you can say marlin or sailfish or GTs or barramundi or trout or whatever. There's just no limit in my view, and we shouldn't limit ourselves. They're all significant. To me, every one of them has some significance. They have some place in our world, in our fly fishing world.
Yeah.
The 100 species in a year was something I set out to do. On one rod.
No kidding. One line?
I beg your pardon?
Did you use one line as well?
No. Oh, no, I'd never limit myself like that. I was bad enough. Bad enough limiting myself with one rod.
Yeah.
The cruncher in the story is that we lost the rod overboard on 64 species.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. But I went on to catch them to get 100 that year, but on different rods, obviously, after that.
Oh, no kidding. Wow.
And anyway, it's fun.
Cool. All right, Peter. Well, I think we can probably end it there. Definitely there's a bunch of stuff we can, maybe on the next one we'll have to dig into deeper if we can get some time down the line. But, in the next 6 to 12 months, anything you want to let us know going on with yourself or anything else in your world? Sure. Cool, mate. Will do. I'm as I say, I'm pretty stuck on this spay thing at the moment. Oh, that's right. I'm off to New Zealand in a few weeks, and I've packed the trout spay rods, and I'm really enjoying this new world for me. New challenge, tying the flies and learning the techniques and of casting and how to fish it. That's been really interesting. And I've got a great mate in New Zealand, Steve Tedesco, and I've mentioned Steve to you, and we fish together, and I learn a lot. He's at it all the time. But more than happy to stay in touch, mate, and thanks very much for your time. Yeah, appreciate it, Peter. And if people want to find you, they can just go to wildfish.com.au if they have any questions or want to catch up with you. Yep, no problem, mate. No problem. All right, Peter. Well, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time here. We had a little bit of technical stuff there, and I know I think it took a little bit longer, but no, I think you're obviously a big name in your neck of the woods, but I think I didn't hear you. I heard you from somebody out here, so I think your lore is growing, around the world. So I think it's good, and I look forward to keeping up with you. Thanks, mate. Can I tell you a very funny story before we go? Yeah, for sure. You got a moment? Oh yeah. So I'm up on the Bulkley with Simon Gorsworth. One of the biggest names in fly fishing in the world. And we've come off the water, and this fella pulls up in a truck, and he's got his son in the truck. This is Sam from Smithers. How are you, Sam? Great to meet you, mate. Anyway, he's got his son in the truck, and he wants to take his son down to cast to his first shot at catching a steelhead on a two-hander on the Bulkley. And Simon and I have just come off the water. And we run into Sam, and Sam says, "Oh, do you mind if I go down here and fish?" And no problem. And he clearly recognised Simon. I go off to make a cup of coffee. We're staying in a place there, and I go off to make a coffee. And he said to Simon. Simon told me later. He said, "Is that Peter Morse?" Oh, no way. Yeah, he was from Australia. Oh, really? He was from Australia. That's crazy. Oh, God, I laughed. There you go. So you are known definitely around the world. Well, I think obviously that's a destination spot up there in the Bulkley, so people, are traveling around. And I mean, and you're in a destination as well. It's one of those things where you got New Zealand next door, but I mean, I'll tell you, Australia is definitely on my bucket list. I mean, I want to get to New Zealand as well, but I'd love to maybe spend a month in Australia, a month in New Zealand sort of thing down the line as well.
Well, you make sure you contact me first, mate, and I'll do everything I can to steer you in the right direction.
All right.
I'll put you on to some good people.
All right, Peter. I appreciate it. We'll catch up with you soon.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
All
Cheers,
right,
mate.
All right, bye. So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes, all the links we covered, just go to wetflyswing.com/111. I'm looking for people interested in heading out to Alaska this summer with me and guests from the podcast. If you want to get more information and find out how to get in on this trip, just you can go to wetflyswing.com/AK. That's the letters A and K. I'm thankful that you're here and listening. I appreciate the support. Every time I check in with people out there, it's always amazing to hear the positive support and both ways, the constructive feedback and the positive support. So just want to thank you for stopping by today and hope to maybe see you on the river or maybe online.